Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here, and joining me on the show from Vikings.com, Lindsey Young. Lindsey, you dropped an incredible story today about Matt Asiata on Vikings.com. And I have to say, there are a few stories that sort of stop you in your tracks, but this one definitely did. So I want to break that down with you. Also, you wrote about your relationship with Bud Grant, which was a really special relationship. You created a lot of content with Bud over the years, so I want to get into those things. But first, how are you enjoying your off season? It's already been pretty eventful for the Vikings.
Yeah, it has. Craig Peters and I were just talking about I can't believe that we're almost into April already. There's definitely, I mean, you and I were just talking kind of offline about how there's kind of some dips and lulls in action, but this off season has seemed pretty busy. There's plenty of stuff to write about. This time of the year, I always have such mixed feelings because I don't think it's any secret to anybody that I get very attached to people. And so it's hard when we're parting ways with guys like Eric Kendricks and Adam Thielen and stuff like that. But then there's also this other piece that's really exciting because you're bringing in new players and new personalities, new talent. So I have a love-hate relationship with free agency, but it's always nice. It's a nice change of pace to get into the off season, have different stuff to work on. Even like you mentioned, the story that I just put out today on Matt Asiata, it was nice to be able to have the energy and the capacity to put into an off field story like that. And so just always looking for stuff to do.
Yeah, and we'll dive into that in just a second. But I was going to say that how old should we feel that when I got to Minnesota in 2016, Adam Thielen had not broken out yet as a good wide receiver in the NFL. And Eric Hendricks was a second year linebacker that people were talking about, like maybe this is a year he takes the next step after, a good rookie season in 2015. And now they're old and too expensive to keep around, and they leave and we're like, wait, how long have we been doing this for, that we saw their whole career arcs at this point? That I will say that hit me more than probably anybody else that has left over the years.
Kendricks hit me super hard because I started in December of his rookie season. So he had already, I didn't come on till mid-December. But yeah, he was a rookie that year and people were kind of excited about him and but he was very much under the radar at that point. I remember talking about nobody really knows who he is outside of the Vikings fans and stuff like that. And yeah, for him to now be moving on to the Chargers and really look back at his whole career here, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so old. I think it's also people were giving me a hard time because I was excited about the Vikings bringing back Andrew DePaula and Greg and I have a personal friendship with Andrew's wife, and so there was a little bit of that piece too. But I've also been giving people crap and saying look, if he leaves, if Andrew DePaula isn't on the team, there are no players that are my age or older. And so Andrew and I are the same age, and so I kind of cling on to that to still feel young, I think.
Now, our friend Chris Thomason, who is leaving the beat to go to Denver, which will never be the same after that, but he has always said that you're not officially old until the oldest player in the league is younger than you. And so we've still
Okay.
got time as long as Aaron Rodgers goes, to the Jets and all that happens. Now that Tom Brady's out, the bar has lowered a little bit, but I think we're okay. Also, no one should ever give you a hard time about anything good that happens to a long snapper. So Andrew DePaula getting his contract, that is an amazing story. That guy
Yeah.
was out of the league and he had torn his ACL and it looked like he had no career at all, and then comes back all Pro Bowl contract. That's, no one should ever be against Andrew DePaula.
It is such a good story. And I think he's been really fun for the fans too. I get it that on game day, maybe that's not really the position that you're honing in on, but he has done fun content stuff with us. What we clipped this thing out of the Dad Mode series that we did with him, and it was just a little piece of the segment, and it was on TikTok, and it went absolutely viral. And it was just this clip of his daughter asking him for a snack and him being I'm sorry, I didn't bring any snacks, and just crushing her. Her spirits were just crushed. And I think he's this relatable person that people enjoy hearing from and enjoy seeing stuff about his family. So I was pumped when he came back.
long snappers are the most like us, even though they are so freakishly talented and
Uh-huh.
also way more athletic than us. But they don't look like Rashad Hill or something, where it's
Right.
just 6'6" and huge arms or anything. So he kind of does look normal. But great story for him, a fun one to follow along. And anyone who's not honing in on the long snapper on game day,
Just
I
you're
don't know what
missing
you're doing.
something. Yeah.
So it has been an interesting offseason. We'll continue to follow your content on there as the roster changes or maybe doesn't. I don't know. I guess we'll see. But I was completely captivated by your story about Matt Asiata because I had no idea that this had happened to him and his family, that his son was shot in a mass shooting and went through just a terrifying couple of, I guess, weeks, months
Mhm.
with his son and his health situation. So I don't know where you want to start with that story, because I think most people don't know
Yeah.
that this happened to a former Viking who was very popular here, Matt Asiata. Scored a lot of touchdowns. It was kind of a hard hat kind of player, and I had no idea. Also, Matt Asiata having a 15-year-old son threw me off a little bit too, as far as our age. But yeah, I'd love you to tell the story.
Yeah, he has 5 kids, which is crazy, and I remember when he was here with the Vikings, he had 5 kids, and he will make jokes about that, about I was definitely the only guy in the locker room with 5 kids. So I heard, like, when the shooting happened, in January 2022, I heard about it, and I didn't make any connection right away. I heard about it, I saw that it was outside of a Utah high school, and there were, 3 teenage boys who were shot, and 2 sadly passed away, and one, Ephraim, was in the hospital. And I can't remember exactly how I figured out that it was his son, but I made that connection. I know there were a few players on our team at the time, or previous teammates of Matt's, like Anthony Barr and CJ Ham, who had like reached out and expressed their support. And at the time, I had just kind of been praying for the family and had interest in telling the story. But of course, like in the middle of that chaos, like he was, even a couple months after, was like fighting so hard to like just have a normal life. And so it was like content was very far out of my mind at that point. But I did kind of pay attention to his story. And then reached back out this off season, kind of shortly after the season, reached out to Matt just to kind of gauge how he felt about sharing the story. And he and his family were super gracious in, trusting me with that story and being willing to talk about it. But it's like heavy stuff. You talk about like him just being out, like they had just gotten a new puppy, and Matt was like walking the puppy and gets this phone call from his sister, and he was like, I almost didn't answer the phone. Like sometimes you don't want to talk to your sibling when they call you. And it was just kind of this lighthearted thing, and all of a sudden your world is completely flipped upside down. And he talked about like the physical damage that was done to Ephraim, like completely damaged, like his pancreas, his liver, his small intestine was pretty much completely taken out. And so it was like 6 months before he could even eat like solid food again, which is crazy when you think about this 15-year-old kid who was on the varsity football team and eating like crazy, like to all of a sudden be in this dire of a situation. The doctors gave Ephraim 1% chance of survival. And Matt was talking about in the story how there was even one point where the doctors said, like, you should probably bring his siblings in and like say goodbye. And they had to make that call of, they had 2 older daughters and 2 like real young little boys. And so it was like they brought the daughters up, didn't really tell them that this was the reason, but in the backs of their minds, like not knowing if he's going to survive. And it goes from that to like, okay, he's continuing to like fight. He's continuing to do really well. He had multiple surgeries. Um, and it's interesting when you talk to Matt, because at that point, right, like all you're thinking is that you hope your son will survive. Like football had been this whole goal, and it's like nobody, like there's no thought of ever playing football again. It's just like, is he going to survive? And he did. And like one of the coolest parts of the story, outside of obviously him defying the odds of 1%, are the fact that he needed a small intestine transplant, and the Asiata family was told that type of surgery, transplant, match, etc., all over my head. But that can be like a 5 to 10 year wait. So he would have been like eating intravenously and all of that kind of stuff. And they got the call, I think, after like 3 months, 3 months or 6 months. I can't remember. It's in the story, but just like things like that kept falling into place. And the fact that he is not only recovered almost completely, I think he just had another minor surgery recently, but he's playing football again. Like he's getting, like looks from colleges and scholarship offers and stuff like that. And it's just wild to me. So I think, like I could go on and on about this and I won't, but like there's such an epidemic in our country with gun violence. And so I wanted this story to shine light on that, but also to shine light on one of the stories that had a happy ending. And like you said, I think fans really liked Matt when he was here. He was a good guy in the community and all that. So it's really good to see this all kind of work out for them.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, a great detail in the story was that the bullets were hollow tips, so they explode when they hit the person, and that made it so much more challenging for doctors. And that was one of the reasons that so many organs of his were impacted, and how hollow tip bullets can be acquired in America is mind blowing. But I guess that's for another podcast. But in your conversations with Matt, I mean, just I guess how did he get through this, because there's a lot of people who go through traumatic things in their lives and with family members and everything else, but I can't think of much more than getting that phone call and having to go through all of those things. I mean, that just has to have so much of an impact on your everyday life, but also mentally as well.
Yeah, I think so. Like, and in talking to him, I feel like several things kind of came out. I think there's a piece of it of just trying to be strong for his wife and for his other kids going through that. You kind of like, I think you just sort of like put your own feelings on the back burner almost and try to just like get through each day. I know that their faith is very important to them. And so he did talk about that piece as well, and really having like that as a pillar in their life. And it's really cool to hear about how Matt and his wife like kind of just tag team this whole parenting thing is so great. I mean, we talk about how they were such young parents, and they were, but like their family is such a success story. And it's cool to talk about how during this recovery period for Ephraim, like Matt was really focused on the physical part of the recovery, like helping him to stay motivated. And there were times when Ephraim like wanted to like lift weights in the hospital bed, and Matt was like, no, like we don't have to do that. And he was like, Dad, like I want to. And so it was cool how he could kind of pour himself into that part of it. And then he joked how his wife's like role was like helping him to get back on track with school and stuff like that. Because I mean, Ephraim's like an A student, and he's already back caught up in school, which is crazy. And so, but Matt was really honest too about like this feeling that your world's kind of falling apart, and I think most Vikings fans probably remember that when he was here, I think it was in 2013, his father was tragically killed in an accident back in Utah. And I remember like sort of that being a discussion and like him mourning his dad. And he brought that up in this story about really wanting to honor his dad and the way that his dad taught him how to raise kids and have a family. And so, I think he's kind of an inherently like strong individual mentally, but I'm with you. Like I can't imagine going through that, and it's probably one of those things where like you get the strength when you need it. But it's been a huge ordeal for them. And he talked about how for months they were just sad and anxious and scared all the time. And it was like, and then stuff just started to turn around, and they've been able to have that family time again, and it's just such a happy ending.
Yeah, and the fact that he's playing football again, like, did you ask how that's possible? Because I feel like that would be one of my first questions is, wait, he's actually just even living any sort of normal life after going through that would be difficult.
Right. So what Matt said from a physical standpoint is that had he not gotten the transplant, football would not have been an option. Like contact sports would not have been an option. But he said that when they got the call that there was a transplant, they had to go to Nebraska, to a hospital in Nebraska to get this transplant done. And he said that one of the first things that Ephraim asked the surgeon is like, can I like play sport, like can I play football again after having this done? And the doctor told him like once you recover from this transplant, like you will have no more restrictions physically. And so he does have like very unique dietary like restrictions because of what his liver and pancreas and small intestine have gone through. But like as far as being athletic and like having the contact sport and everything like that, he's still able to just basically return to normal, which is crazy to me.
That is completely crazy and makes no sense, but an incredible story that you wrote. And people should go, if you follow the Vikings on Twitter, which like 5 million people do, then they tweeted out there, or Vikings.com. Matt Asiata's son survives shooting, defies odds in return to football. Amazingly done story. Great work. I also wanted to ask you, so I won't give away all the entire story for that so people can go read it, but I also wanted to ask you about what you recently wrote about Bud Grant's passing. And I think one of the most interesting parts of Bud Grant was that, I mean, the man probably made enough money to retire in Florida, but he didn't want to do that. And Bud was in Minnesota and also was very welcoming to people who wanted to interview him. You saw him interviewed pretty often. He would, but it felt to me like you and Bud Grant formed kind of a special relationship. You did the Letters to Bud series, which was amazing. And I guess I just love to hear about how that developed over the years from you getting the job writing for the Vikings website and then getting to know Bud through the latter part of his life.
Yeah, thanks for asking me about that too, because it just is something that's been really special to me. And so the first time I ever met Bud, I was actually not working for the Vikings. I was working full time at my alma mater, and I was just kind of writing on the side. I was doing some blog work for Vikings territory at the time, and so I'd been following along, obviously, with Viking stuff. I was very familiar with who Bud was. And he had his annual like garage sale. I think it was supposed to be a one-time thing, and then it just every year kept coming back to no one's surprise. But so the first time I met him was truly like as a fan. I was born and raised in Minnesota. My dad always told me about Bud Grant. I thought that this was such a unique opportunity to like meet someone like that just in person at his home in Bloomington. And so that was sort of my first memory of like meeting him. I just remember he was like very kind, like serious but kind. And I had like this custom painted shoe that a friend had done for me that was like Vikings, and he autographed it, and I thought it was so cool. And so my first experience really was as a fan. And then that next year, it was about 6 months before I started working for the Vikings, I actually reached out to, it was like a friend of Bud's who was helping him run the sale. And I talked to him about potentially wanting to talk to Bud for this story. And I think I always just took the approach where I was like really transparent about who I was, what I was doing. Like this wasn't for any big news outlet. It was just something that I was really interested in. And so Bud agreed that I could come to his sale and like interview him there. And so I went and kind of like sat a chair down next to him and figured it would be a few minutes. And, he talked to me for about a half an hour. And I just like remember thinking even at that time, I'm like, I could sit and listen to this man's stories for so long. Like he's engaging, and he has like, at that time he was what, like 88 or something like that, 80, 85 maybe. So it's like, he's elderly, but his mind was so sharp, like up until the end. And so I had that really great interaction with him. We talked a lot. I told him about kind of what I wanted to do with my career. But then it was like 6 months later that I got hired by the Vikings, and I was getting kind of a tour of the press box and the field that was at the U of M. And I was walking with my manager, Craig, and we kind of turned the corner and there was Bud. And I remember thinking like, oh, like there's Bud Grant. Like, that's so cool that he's here and whatever. And he was like, hey, there she is. And came over and like gave me a hug and like gave me this like kiss on the top of my head. And it was very sweet and very endearing. And I still remember the look on on Craig's face, like, okay, like my job here is done. Like I have nothing else to do. So it was kind of this like unique connection from the beginning. And then throughout my time at the Vikings, like I had said, I couldn't remember who said this, but someone within the organization had joked that I was like the Bud Grant whisperer, because if we needed to like make a request of him, or if we needed to like um, like ask him a clarifying question or something like that. Like a lot of times it was like, Linz, why don't you go down to his office and ask him? Because he tended to just be a little like softer with me. And so, but over the years, it just really grew. Like the Letters to Bud project was really cool and really unique. And we talked a lot during that. He would check in on the project and ask me questions, and just really loved that I was doing that. And so it was an online project that was on Vikings.com, but I got like a bound copy made just like at a print center, and gave that to him. And I remember like he thought that that was really cool. And that really touched my heart. And so I think just organically over the years, like we developed this more of like a friendship, more than a work based relationship. You know, like I would eat lunch with him when he would come in, or I'd stop by and sit in his office for a while and chat with him. And we did a lot of content around him, like you said, and I just got to know him really well. And he would always give me a hard time for certain things. Like, he would, before I got my dog that I have now, he would talk to me about having a dog and like the importance of like having a well-trained dog. And like, he would get really serious about it. And I remember when we did Purple Pups with him, I was like getting really affectionate with his black lab at the time. And I just was like, oh, she's so sweet. And I just remember like the look he gave me of just like pure annoyance. And he was like, I bet you'd let a dog sleep in your bed with you. And like, he was very disappointed. So when I got Tater last year, I had to let him know, like, I'm crate training my puppy. And he was proud of that. So he was just a really special person where I think he had kind of this persona of like that gruff exterior, and being really stoic, and like those things were real, but it just wasn't all he was. He was funny, and he was kind-hearted, and he really had like strong values. He didn't like cussing. He didn't like smoking. He would talk about like the different rules that he had for the players, when he was coaching. And just really like integrity was very important to him. I remember him talking to me about that, like to never gain someone's trust, and then throw that out the window or betray their trust for sake of a story, things like that. So he was really, really special. And obviously the COVID pandemic made things difficult. And I do remember thinking, like, when we were kind of all in isolation, like, I hope that I can see him again. You just don't know when someone is that elderly. But fortunately, I was able to see him multiple times after that, and just have lots of really great memories. And so when he passed away, I actually was in Florida. I was coming home that day, but I got a text and a phone call from my manager that morning. And I was just devastated. Like, I was completely, I just didn't see it coming. And I've had a couple people be like, wow, like, how can you be like shocked or saddened by like someone who was 95? Like, he lived a great life. And I'm like, he did live a great life. It's also still okay to be sad. Like, and I think, Matt, like, you can attest to this. He kind of just seemed like this person who was kind of invincible, a little bit like Sid Hartman, who made it to 100. And I kind of thought that Bud would just try to outlive Sid. And it was sort of this thing where I don't think people took him for granted, but he just was always around. Um, he never really appeared to be in poor health. It just was very unexpected. And so, I was happy that I got to kind of reflect on my relationship with him and share that with other people, because like I said, he was stoic, he was grumpy, he did have kind of this like gruff exterior, but he was so much more than that.
Yeah, it did take people by surprise, because I was at Bob Hagan's retirement party, who's the Vikings PR man, and Bud Grant's son was there that night and said, "Oh, my father's a little under the weather. He's doing fine and nothing to worry about," and whatever else. Didn't seem to be suspecting anything at all, and then it just kind of happened. And also, I would say too, what I wrote for the lead to my story about Bud was send your condolences to the entire state,
Yeah.
because it's so many people formed that relationship with him. And even if you never met him, it felt like you knew him so well. And
Mhm.
he was so available and around. And it always amazed me that he had an office and like that he would actually come to that office and spend time there. And Kevin O'Connell talked about how Bud Grant was there and they would have lunch each week. I mean, what a great experience for Kevin O'Connell to have. I wanted to ask you just one more thing, was what was your favorite letter to Bud? Because you chronicled all the letters that he had gotten over the years, and I'm sure that you could pick a bunch of them, but I wondered if one sticks out that you'd want to talk about.
Yeah, so there was this one. I feel like it would be really easy to pick one of the letters that were from maybe someone that we've heard of. Like the letter from Herb Brooks was really cool. And there was, even a letter in there from Richard Nixon or former NFL owners. But there was actually this one woman who had written a letter and who had told Bud that she wasn't really a big football fan. Her husband was this massive football fan who just loved Bud Grant, and they lived on the East Coast, and so they had gotten tickets one time to when the Vikings came out to play the Patriots because her husband just was so passionate about seeing this person on the sidelines. And it was a sad letter because she said that her husband had passed away at 36 or 37 or something like that from a heart attack, and it had been completely unforeseen. But she talked about just how big of an impact Bud had made on her husband, and the values that he had and the things that he watched for in football, and so through that she kind of had become a football fan herself and had followed Bud's career, and she really was just writing this letter to thank him for having such a huge impact on her husband's life. And it was ones like that, I think, that really touched my heart. There was that one, and then there was a little girl who had written in who was 11 or 12, and she was very cute because it reminded me, I think, of my interest in football growing up, and she had thoughts and opinions for Bud on who should be starting and what plays he should run, and so that kind of stuff was really fun too. Just the fact that I think he kept those is what touched my heart. Of course, if you have a letter from Herb Brooks, you're probably going to keep it, but these were from fans who he didn't know from Adam, but it was cool to see how much that they had impacted him.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the great things about chronicling a project like that is also it reveals a lot about Bud and
Mhm.
how he was viewed and who wanted to connect with him and things like that, but also said so much about him. So it's a great thing, and just go search it, Letters to Bud. I'm sure you can find it easily in a Google search. Lindsey, you do awesome work. So now before we wrap up, let's do a mock draft. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you. But we've got more off-season excitement, I'm sure, to come. So people should follow your work at Vikings.com. But I really love when you do these long features, these in-depth deep dives. You do tremendous work with those. So I appreciate you taking us through two of them and implore people to go find these projects because they're such good reads. So thanks so much for doing this. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, so much. I always appreciate our conversations, and the ability to talk about these two stories specifically I really love it. And I will give one tiny plug since we're talking about letters to Bud. So we're actually inviting fans to send in letters again. So if you had some sort of interaction with Bud, or if he just impacted you in some way, we are inviting fans to send in letters, and we may do a second installment of the series, and we'll kind of see how it goes. But at the very least, those letters will be given to Bud's family. So there's more info on that under this at the end of the story that Matt and I are talking about. So you can find that on Vikings.com. But I really, really would love to see what fans send in. So just want to put in a plug for that.
That is such a great idea. And I'm sure that you will get all sorts of people sending in their memories of Bud. So thanks again, Lindsey Young. Go to Vikings.com, read the story, follow you on Twitter, follow the Vikings on Twitter to find it. And I retweeted it too. So it's out there. If you can't find it, you're not trying.
Yeah.
But great stuff, Lindsey. And we'll see each other soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt.